Awesome. Hey all, thank you for joining me for this presentation. My name is Jae Wilson. I'm the lead consultant and trainer at Onyx Reporting, as well as Jet Reports expert. I'm here today to review with you the inventory turnover report that comes for free with the Jet Report player. If you're not familiar with it, the Jet Report player is a body of about 100 reports. Half of them will work against your ERP system, whether it's NAV, GP, or AX, and the other half of the reports will work against the Jet Enterprise cubes. The Jet Enterprise cubes add a lot of functionality to your reporting and analytics, but I think the most impressive part, of course, is always the dashboarding, the visualizations. It's most akin, or it's what people think about when they start having conversations about Click or Power BI. They say, oh, I want these dashboards, I want these KPIs, how can I get my hands on them? And Jet Enterprise offers a really powerful and robust tool for that. Okay. Ultimately, what I'm going to show you how to do, or show you what I did, is I'll show you how I added months of inventory, both to the standard Jet report and to the Jet Enterprise cubes. If you don't know what months of inventory is, or if it's a new or unfamiliar concept to you, if I posed you this question, if you had 10 eggs and consumed 2 eggs per day, in how many days will you run out of eggs? And if you thought about that question, of course you know the answer right away. You're like, yeah, in 5 days I'll run out of eggs. Well, that's the whole idea behind months of inventory. And of course, that's an important question for people to be able to answer for many reasons, right? If you are involved in sales and you say, okay, I just want to make sure that I don't overstock my inventory, but I also don't want to understock too. So how do I know how much I need or how much I have available and when I'll run out, right? That's of course an important question if you say have perishable products like say milk. You don't want to have too much milk because it'll expire, and you don't want to run out of milk because nobody wants to run out of milk. Jerry Seinfeld did a whole stand-up about that. Additionally, from the purchasing side, right, it's the same question. If I have XYZ amount of inventory in the warehouse, and I know that my lead time is 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, who knows, maybe you're importing things from China, right? If you have a long lead time, then you want to make sure that you order things early enough in advance. Again, without overstocking or understocking, because there are costs associated with carrying inventory. So that's the whole gist behind months of inventory. In this webinar, what I'll do is I will introduce the standard inventory turnover report. And I'll use that as a way of teaching you how you can be a little bit more successful with your interactions with pivot tables. We'll use it as a means of kind of deciphering what goes on in your Jet reports when you push the run button. We'll talk about how you can make sure that these reports are more in alignment with your metrics. I'll show you how to add the KPIs to the pivot table. In parens, I said the wrong way because while I did implement what my client asked for, in my opinion, it was not the best solution. And then I'll get into the better solution, which is to implement these KPIs with Jet Enterprise. And so we'll break it down. You know, what pieces do you need in order to calculate months of inventory? We'll talk it through. I'll show you how you add it in the Jet Data Manager, and then we'll take a look at visualizing the data in Excel as well as Power BI. That's the plan. I'm telling myself, I'm giving myself 30 minutes to put this video together. If it takes longer than that, well, I'm going to try not to. So let's get straight into it. So again, here's the inventory turnover report. Right, you can take a quick look at it. It's super exciting. We have some interactivity, insofar as we can click on the slicers and the data changes, and that's great. And then over here on the left, we have the KPIs that we asked for. Let me just jump straight into showing you how I put these calculations in. That way, if that's all you were in it for, you can, go about your day. So it's super easy, right? You just go in here, you click your equal sign, and you say, okay, average sales is going to be equal to the sales quantity divided by the number of months. Piece of cake. And then month supply is equal to quantity on hand divided by average sales. Okay, let's first talk about how I came up with that calculation for the number of months. In your report, you have a start date and an end date. And what you want to do is you want to calculate the number of months in between. There is an undocumented function. So it's a function that doesn't really have an extensive tooltip. So if I type called dateDiff, and you can see right away I type equals dateDiff. Normally you would expect it to say, okay, these are the arguments that we're looking for or something like that, but it's undocumented, which means you won't find it. You can, however, Google Excel dateDiff and it will tell you what the arguments are, or if you look here, it's not that complicated. You have start date, end date, and then the unit of measure. You want to take start date minus end date and measure it in days, months, quarters, years, what have you. That's the dateDiff, pretty straightforward. One thing to take note of course, is that the dateDiff function returns an integer. And given that I ran from January 1st, 2015 to January, February, March, April, May, June 6th, 2016, these are obviously not whole months. So it kind of just rounded to 17. And if you need a higher degree of precision in your calculation, then obviously you have to turn to a different Excel-based function or make your calculation a different way. But I think for many people, dateDiff will be a good way of calculating the difference between two dates. Piece of cake. All right, I put my calculation here in for average sales, and as I drag through, we're going to rapidly see that I forgot how to make absolute cell references, so let's fix that. Round 2. Okay. Let's drag this through now. As you drag it through, we're going to be disappointed, shall we say, to see that the numbers didn't change. And what that speaks to is the fact that we're not using a cell reference. So this is not the value M, we're not doing a cell reference to the sales quantity and pulling in, whatever the number is. We're actually putting in a GetPivotData function. If I do equals and then click inside of pivot table, I don't get C95 or anything like that. I actually get a GetPivotData function. And one of the problems that we have here is that the filter that says what are you looking for is hard-coded into the GetPivotData function, which is actually not that big a problem. To get the right value, or to be able to have this function be dynamic, I'm going to take out the hard-coded description, and then for the item number, I'll just replace that with a cell reference to C22. And now because the item number is no longer hard-coded as I autofill down, you can see the values change. And we'll do the same thing over here. The cell reference to the item number is in C22. Pull it all the way through. Ta-da! We have our month's supply, and it's glorious. Okay, so that was the solution that my client was looking for. Nice, simple, and easy. However, if I'm honest, I don't like this solution. And the reason being is pivot tables were originally intended to offer an analysis tool, right? We got excited about it because we can click on the buttons and it's interactive. We can change the way our pivot table looks and it just works. But look at all these pound ref errors. Furthermore, if I change the way my pivot table looks, if I said, oh, I want to take out the description. Oh, that continues to work, sorry. If I change the order and say I want to show the description first. It doesn't seem like an unreasonable request, but all of a sudden my pivot table stops working. If I want to change what I'm showing on my axes, if I wanted to show maybe salespersons or customers, or the vendor that the item was purchased from, right? If I just want to change the layout of my pivot table, all of a sudden, these functions that are external to the pivot table stop working because they are reliant on the item number being in column C23. or in C, column C. So me personally, I don't like, and I very strongly discourage my clients from having cell references into pivot tables, but you do what you gotta do. So then Jay, what is the proposed solution? What should we do instead? Well, believe it or not, this function actually has calculated fields in it. Sorry, this pivot table has calculated fields in it. If you'll notice, there's a field called sales quantity signed reversed. So somehow magically, they took the sales quantity column and they multiplied it by -1. And they did the same thing for negative adjustments. And if you think about average inventory, in NAV, there's no column called average inventory. So how did they get average inventory? Well, what you can do is you can click on Pivot Table Tools, Analyze, Field Items and Sets, and click on List Formulas. If you have any calculations that are built into the pivot table, you would see here a list of said formulas. So for example, there's a calculated field called sales quantity signs reverse, and they just took the sales quantity multiplied by -1. Same thing for negative adjustments. For average inventory, you can see it's the average of these different columns. If I look at the underlying pivot table, if I look at the underlying report, I can see, okay, item description, right? This is the result of a GetNL table or the table builder report. And you can see here they have these columns for quantity at the end of period 1, period 2, period 3, period 4, and so on. And then it's these values that get averaged. Super exciting. Okay. So that's kind of introducing the pivot tables. I showed you the way you can add your KPIs using this GetPivotData function. I kind of lamented the way it was built. That's all well and good. I would just strongly recommend, if you use reports built by JetReport, if you use reports out of the report player, do make sure to look through the README because it might give you some information or some insight into how it works. If you can read Jet reports, or if you can read Jet functions, do take the time to put the report into design mode so you can kind of decipher what's going on. And this is actually the most important part. You all might think this is a dig at Jet reports, but this is important to know. All the reports are built as examples only. They will return your data if it's configured correctly, and they may work differently on your database. Okay. I want to start there because this report is potentially misleading / wrong. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, you see here I have this slicer for location code, and location code usually speaks to like the warehouse where your inventory is actually stored. And in this sample database, there are 4 different warehouses, and you would think that if I click on green, it would show me the inventory in that warehouse. If I click on white, it would show that inventory in that warehouse. And you're really excited because you're like, Jay, what are you talking about? The numbers here, or the values here are clearly changing. So it's showing me the inventory in that warehouse. And unfortunately, if you read through the code here, that assumption is incorrect. So this report was built using the table builder. There's nothing wrong with the table builder, but there is a small problem in our understanding of how the location code gets pulled in. This report was built against the item table in NAV, and the item table in NAV makes 1 row for each item. And then we use what's called a link field to pull in the location code. And basically what it does is it finds the first item in the item ledger entry and says, okay, where is it at? And say, oh, you're in warehouse A. And then it says, okay, well, all the inventory for XYZ item is in warehouse A, and the next item is all in a different warehouse. And basically the end result is if you have inventory spread across 3 warehouses, it will say all of your inventory is in the same warehouse, the first warehouse that it came across. And that, of course, is potentially wrong. And to kind of prove that, what I'll do is I'll rerun this report. And if I sort by item number, you would expect, if I had inventory, if this was a true inventory report, it seems likely that I would have inventory spread across multiple locations, right? Where's my location column? Here it is. I would have inventory spread across multiple locations, green, green, blue, red, and so on. And maybe I would see the same item number multiple times because it's in multiple locations. But that's not the case. You'll never see an item number repeated because in the item table, each item has to be unique. The only way that this report could accurately show, okay, what inventory do you have at warehouse red, what inventory do you have in warehouse blue, is if they actually had multiple columns for quantity on hand, and one was quantity on hand at location A, quantity on hand at warehouse red, quantity on hand at warehouse B. That's the only way to make this report correct, but it's not that way. So it's technically wrong if you have inventory spread across multiple warehouses, potentially. Again, that's not a dig at Jet Reports. This is a stock report. It's supposed to be customized. You're supposed to take it and develop it further. But ultimately, what I wanted to speak to is the fact that you have to take the time to understand how the report works. Take the time to make sure that the report works the way you expect it to. You know, another thing that they're doing here is they're saying, okay, you put in the date range and we'll calculate average inventory. But one of the questions you have to ask is, okay, well, how many measurements are you taking? How many samples are you taking? In this 17-month span, is it just 2 samples? So are you taking a measurement at the beginning and the end and then dividing it by 2? Are you taking 4 samples? Are you taking 10 samples? If you know anything about averages, right, you know the more samples you take, the closer you'll get to the right number, the right average. And in this report, you only take 10 samples. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You take a fixed number of samples, which could be good, bad, or indifferent, right? You might be comfortable with each sampling. I think I can find it if I just unhide some stuff. Yeah, you might be comfortable by having each sample being 10, this report to have 10 samples, and each sample has 52 days in it. And if I do a shorter date range, the sample size will be smaller. Or sorry, the number of days per period will be smaller. I think most people, when they talk about months of inventory on hand, want to look at this average as a calculation of months. So let's get into how you would do these analytics using Jet Enterprise. Because Jet Enterprise, I really think is not the only way, but possibly the better and definitely the most flexible way of getting this done. So what I've done here is I have a document that basically has all the calculations that you need, and then some. And if you want an access to this document, just let me know and I'll email it to you, okay? All right, so again, the question was, if you had 10 eggs and consumed 2 eggs per day, in how many days will you run out of eggs? What are the metrics that you have to have in order to answer this question? What are the metrics that we're speaking of? So like, for example, what is 10 eggs? 10 eggs is the same as your quantity on hand. What is your inventory on hand at this point in time? And here is a calculation. This is a standard JET calculation that will get you that answer. There's a couple different ways to calculate balance, if you will, the quantity at a point in time. And this is one of them, or this is the stock one. I think there are better calculations out there, but we'll run with this one. And then the next measure we need is the fact that you consume 2 eggs per day. Well, how do you know you consume 2 eggs per day? Well, I looked at all of the activity over the last 2 weeks, and I came to the conclusion that on average I consume 2 eggs per day. So in order to calculate average, what you'll have to do is you'll have to say, okay, what period are you looking across? Are you looking across 4 days, 3 days, 20 days, right? We already talked about, depending on how your organization works, the number of days or months will differ in terms of what's appropriate, right? Do you have high seasonality? Do you have relatively flat seasons in terms of consumption rates, right? So how do you calculate average? And in order to calculate average sales, you need to know just sales in the 3 periods. And what I've highlighted here is 3 different ways of calculating sales. One that looks at the sales for the last 3 months at a point in time, and another one that looks at calculating sales in the last 3 periods. Now, obviously, because I'm saying it with such emphaticness, and because these calculations are obviously different, they must mean something different, and the answer will come out when we look at it in a pivot table. What is the difference between sales across the last 3 months and sales across the last 3 periods? Oh, and also we need to figure out, how do you calculate sales, right? Because in order to calculate sales in 3 months, you just have to be able to calculate sales, which is an easy one. This is just the sum of quantity where the item ledger entry type is a 1. Item ledger entry type is a 1 is where the entry type is sale. Now, depending on your organization, you might say, well, Jay, I just want to look at sale, but you also may want to consider consumption, because consumption will reduce your inventory as well. You might sell eggs, but you also might use eggs for making scrambled eggs, and that will affect how quickly you run out of eggs. Also, depending on how you handle stock obsolescence, so if it's, milk expires or eggs expire, if you write that off using a negative adjustment, you might want to include negative adjustments in your calculation for sales quantity, or at that point it would obviously be inventory consumption. In any event, in order to calculate months inventory on hand, the pieces that we need to have quantity on hand, we need to be able to calculate average. In order to calculate average sales, we need to have sales quantity across 3 months. In order to have sales quantity across 3 months, we have to be able to just calculate sales, right? So you have to, at the end of the day, when you're doing this KPI exercise, you have to break it down into its individual component parts and then put them all into the Jet Data Manager one at a time. And in a way where they build off each other. So here's the Jet Data Manager. I apologize in advance if it's small and a little bit difficult to read, but you're on YouTube, you guys are technically savvy, I'm sure you can figure out how to zoom in. And I've actually put them all of the metrics in already, but I just kind of want to show you how I can, just go through putting in 1 or 2, so you just have an idea of the process. So obviously you're going to go to the inventory cubes, you're going to find measures, and you have 3 different types of measures: standard measures, derived, and calculated. All of these measures that we used are either calculated measures or these, what used to be called business functions and have now been relabeled as snippets. In order to see the snippets, or in order to see the business functions, you will have to have imported the library in advance. If you haven't done that, I've done a tutorial on how to do that. It's online at the Jet Reports knowledge base. Just let me know. I can send you a link to an article or a tutorial video that shows you how to do it. In any event, I'm going to show you how to add sales quantity as a measure. Now, when you're going in and creating calculated measures, it's important to define the associated measure group. Usually that will be the fact table that your calculation is based off of. So in my inventory cube, there's only one fact table called inventory transactions. So that choice is obvious. If you were in the finance cube, there's 2 fact tables. One's going to be the finance transactions, and the other one, the finance budget transactions. So depending on if your KPI that you're putting in place is about actual transactions or if it's about budgets, will determine what value you put in. And that's what this dropdown is all about. Let me find my calculation. Here it is. Just copy and paste. Piece of cake. And then for the format string, what do you want it to look like when you drop it into a pivot table? I don't necessarily want to show decimal places, so I'll just do hash, comma, hash, so that there's a thousands place. Right? What do you want it to look like? Now, this is the what's called MDX, or this is the code that will calculate the sales quantity. We already talked about it, saying that this is the measure quantity and where the item ledger entry type is a 1. Now, what you can do, especially if you're copy pasting code in, what I can strongly recommend that you do is you parameterize your function. And what that means is, or what it is you'll grab the measures quantity and drag it and drop it into the expression tab. And notice how it adds this bit down here that lets you know that this function has been parameterized. In other words, if in 2 or 3 years you say, you know what, gosh, I really want to rename quantity and I want to abbreviate it, or I want to call it something else. Now you don't have to update all of your functions that refer to the quantity measure. It's been parameterized, it'll auto-update, and it'll just work. How's that for cool? Same for item ledger entry type. I can find the dimension, item ledger entry type, and drag and drop it in. And delete this bit. Yep. And so now it's parameterized. If you change these dimension names, the function will still continue to work. That's all we're going for here. Okay. Now there's quantity sale and quantity sales. All right. Let me take out that one. Oh, that one was being used. Darn it. So you can see here in this function, quantity sales in 3 months, I did not parameterize it. There are no parameters down here. So I just need to parameterize it real quick. Posting date.dateYQMD, right? I could do the same process for the dimensions. I'm not going to, but I just want to make sure that this is still going to work. Yep, I think that should be all of them. Okay. You can deploy and execute. However, if you're just working with calculated measures or these MDX business functions, you can just reapply script commands and it should recalculate with your new measures. When we get to our pivot table, here it is. Okay. Let me just do a quick refresh, make sure it works. Good. And all of your measures will come in. I'm kind of surprised they're not in alphabetical order, but okay. All right, so this is the stock cube. We can see here we've got items, we're showing quantity. Just real quick, like if you're not super familiar with cubes, once you have Jet Enterprise installed, when you click on the pivot table button, you would see, if it's been configured properly, you should see the list of your 6 stock cubes. Jet Enterprise ships with 6 stock cubes, including sales, receivables, purchases, payables, and finance cube. They're all based off of standard nav or GP or whatever your ERP system is. And from there, you just go about customizing it, right? You customize the stock project. Jay, what do you mean by customize? Well, we went in and we added these new KPIs, and that's something that you would have to do. Okay, so we're showing quantity. Here's my sales quantity. Let's show quantity on hand. Very nice, right? One of the things I really like about pivot tables is they just work always and forever. We can show the month's inventory on hand. Okay. Now this is interesting. Months quantity on hand by 3 months, this column is always blank. And then months quantity on hand by 3 periods, this column occasionally has values. And it just comes down to, were there sales? Okay. So let's try to unpack why these two columns, which you think would be the same, month inventory on hand by, you would think they'd be the same, but let's figure out why they're not. All right. What I'll do is I'll show my items here, and let's find item sales, because that's actually what makes all the difference in the world. Nope, don't show days, don't need days. Don't show days. Okay, and let's pull in quantity sales in 3 months and 3 periods. Okay. Remember I said earlier, I highlighted these two guys in yellow. I said they sound the same. They're obviously different. Why do I have two different calculations for something that should be theoretically the same thing? The question is in how things roll up. So let's look at this line. For January, let me highlight it in yellow so I can find it quickly. For January 2016, I had 251 units of sales. And then for sales in the last 3 periods, I get 259, and sales in the last 3 months, I get 259. Well, how do you get sales in the last 3 months? Well, we took this January, December, and November, and the sum of that is 259. That number makes sense. For sales in the last 3 periods, it did the same thing. What were the last 3 periods? January, December, November. That makes sense. At the month level, the values will always be the same. However, the question is, what happened when I rolled up to Q1? Notice here, these values are different. Can I find a light enough color? Yeah. So here, there were 251 units of sales in Q1, and it says the quantity sales in 3 months were 251. Well, if you say, okay, from the end of quarter 1, that includes March, February, and January, that sums up to 251. Fine, I agree with that. That number makes sense. But what about this 259? Why do I have 259? Well, this is the quantity sales in the last 3 periods. Well, what were the last 3 periods? Well, if you start at 2016 Q1, the last 3 periods would include 2016 Q1, Q4, and Q3. Now, Q3 had no sales, and if I just take the sum of Q4 and Q1, that's the 259. Where it's super important, because a lot of times we ignore the quarters, is what happens when you look at it in years, right? When you look at this, you might say, oh gosh, Jay, this number is definitely wrong because I did have sales in 2016. Yes, you did. However, what were the last 3 months of 2016? That would have been December, November, or October. And there were no sales in Q4. So there were definitely, that explains why the number is 0 for 2016. When I look at the sales in the last 3 periods of 2016, what it's actually doing is it's saying, okay, give me the sales for 2016, 2015, and 2014. And that's that 259 number again. It's not right, wrong, or indifferent, right? It just comes down to, if I said this column is quantity sales in the last 3 periods, or average sales, right? Because that's what it comes down to. If I show average sales, if I said, without looking at these labels, if you said, okay, what were my average sales in 2016? what do you think that means? Is it the last 3 months of sales of 2016, or is it 2016, 15, and 14? Whatever the right answer is for your organization, that's the calculation we need to use, but understand that average sales can be calculated many different ways. And it's really up to you as an organization to kind of work with your analysts to understand, okay, what am I looking for? What do I want it to be? And then how do I go about visualizing it? I know it's getting a little bit late, so let's wrap this up. Let me pull in my item number just to show you that it works. Where's items? Okay. And we said we're going to do months quantity on hand by 3 periods. And let's just pull in months quantity on hand by 3 months. Okay, so we have a problem/opportunity now. Okay, here's my inventory. And sometimes it tells me that, or it has no value here. And the reason why it has no value is because of how division works. If you had no, this column here, if you had no average sales, and you try to take your quantity on hand and divide it by 0, normally you would get an error. But when we set up the division, months quantity on hand, we used a business function, and let me copy this into my OneNote so you can actually read it. We used a business function here, and this business function says if there is a value, then do this division. That way, if this value were a 0, return a null. And that's why, as I look at my pivot table, that's why it says my month's quantity on hand is blank. And of course that could be misleading because you do have inventory and it will last for a while. How do you calculate how long it's going to last if you don't have average sales? If that doesn't make sense, if I said, okay, you have 2 eggs, in how many days will you run out of eggs? If you don't have this piece of information, you would never be able to calculate how long it's going to take you to run out of eggs. That's just a fact. So what are you going to do to adjust for that? What are we going to change about this calculation to allow for the possibility that maybe you don't have average sales? Sorry, this should say average sales. I just saw that. That's wrong. This should say average sales. Okay. At the end of the day, there is not necessarily a right or wrong answer. It just comes down to expectations. What do you want it to look like? The cubes are infinitely customizable. These calculations, these KPIs are infinitely customizable. We just have to go through that process of defining what you expect to see, what you expect the data to mean. Okay? My recommendation is get it working right in Excel the way you want it to before you go over to some other application. Speaking of other applications, we do have Power BI. You can visualize your data in Power BI. I know a lot of people ask, oh, does Jet Enterprise work with Power BI? Is it better or worse or different? Should I use Jet Mobile? What should I do? The answer is yes, you should do all of the above. No one visualization tool is going to be the right tool for your entire organization. Some people will love working with pivot tables in Excel. Others want the interactivity of Power BI dashboards or Power BI with their linked visualizations. So what I mean by linked visualizations is if I pull in another, oh, no, don't do that, sorry. If I pull in another chart here, can I make that work? Come on, give me location, please. Okay, what I meant by interactivity is if I click on this guy, notice how, well, the chart didn't change J. How about if I click and do it the other way around? Yeah. So as I click on one chart, it does filter, or it does have an effect on the other chart. Okay, that's that interactivity that you only get in Power BI that you don't necessarily have in Excel. And if that's important to you, well, make adjustments. Okay. Should you use the Jet Mobile? Absolutely. If you're looking for KPIs that appear on your phone that you can see really easily, and you're using the web portal, especially the most recent release of Jet Professional 2017 R3. If you're using these products, then absolutely find the visualization tool that works for you. But at the end of the day, and that's what this webinar is all about, what we were looking at is we're saying, okay, here's this metric that my client has. Here's this standard report that they pulled out of the report player. How can they integrate that KPI in place? We talked about using the GetPivotData function. We talked about the date diff function. That was just kind of like getting the right answer for my client. Okay, good, done. The second piece that we need to do is we need to understand how these Jet reports are put together. And if you can't read these table builder reports, I really strongly recommend that you talk to someone like me who can, because they will be able to help you understand if there are instances where you might reach a conclusion that is inaccurate, where you might assume, oh, the location code is doing what I think it should, and actually you're drawing the wrong conclusion. Wouldn't want that to happen to you. And then lastly, we talked about, okay, how do you create a KPI for the months of inventory on hand? What pieces do we need to put together? In answering that question, we saw how depending on how you define sales quantity, whether across 3 months or 3 periods, can yield different results. And we just need to understand, okay, what assumptions are your users going to make when they're looking at a pivot table, and how can we adjust the code that we implement appropriately. Woo, that was a lot. All right, that's the end of the webinar or this training session. My name is Jae Wilson. I'm the lead consultant over at Onyx Reporting. I'm more than happy to talk to you about any of this stuff that I presented here, whether it's how do you customize your Jet reports from the report player, how do you get started in Jet Enterprise, which visualization tool is the right tool for your organization. I'm always happy to have these conversations. So hit me up at jae@onyxreporting.com, and I'll catch you guys later. Cheers. Bye.